Muy
Good
buenas tardes
afternoon,
a todos.
everyone.
Antes
Before
de
we
iniciar el
begin these
conversatorio, les
conversations,
voy a
I
indicar
want to
que
mention
para
that we
usar el
have
sistema de
interpretation
interpretación, el cual
available
pueden habilitar
on
desde
Zoom.
el botón
At the bottom
inferior
bar,
español-inglés
there's
o
a button that says
inglés-español.
interpretation, and you can enable Spanish or
Muy buenas
English. Good
tardes a
afternoon,
todas y
everyone
todos
from
desde
Chile. My
Chile.
name is
Mi nombre es
Pamela
Pamela
Castilla,
Castillo,
Executive
secretaria
Secretary
ejecutiva
of
de UN-GGIM
UN-GGIM
Americas.
Americas.
Les doy la más
You
cordial
are welcome to
bienvenida
the
al
third
tercer
virtual
conversatorio virtual
conversations titled
titulado
Let's Speak
Conversemos
about the
sobre el
Integrated
empoderado de
Framework
información
on
geospatial centrado en la
Information
Vía Estratégica 4 sobre datos.
Framework.
Este evento es facilitado
This is
por UN-GGM Américas
facilitated
y
by
forma parte de una
UN-GGM
serie de
Americas, and
conversatorios
it's a series of
organizados
conversations
en el
organized in the
marco de las
framework of the
actividades
activities
del
of the
Grupo de
working group,
Trabajo
the regional
Regional
working
del
group of
UN-IGIF,
UN-IGIF,
liderado
led by
por
Panama and Chile.
Chile.
This
Esta
series is
serie
approaching
abordando cada
each of the
una de las
strategic
vías
pathways of
estratégicas
this
del eje
global
básico
framework,
global
with the
con el
purpose of
propósito de
deepening
profundizar en
intangible
experiencias
experiences of
comunes de
application.
aplicación. No
We
podemos
cannot
dejar
stop
de
thanking the
agradecer a los
colleagues
colegas de
from
las
Americas and other
Américas y los
regions that
especialistas
are
que nos
with us
acompañan
today,
el día de hoy
and
y también a los destacados
the
panelistas que
panelists that will
comparten su
share their
conocimiento y experiencia
experience
con
with
nosotros.
us. To
Para
begin
el
this
inicio de este
conversation,
conversatorio,
I invite
invito a
Sofia
su querido
Niol-Crisostomo,
Crisóstomo,
President of
presidenta de
UNGGM
UN-GGIM
Americas,
Américas,
who will
quien
share
compartirá unas
some
palabras de
welcoming
bienvenida.
words.
Adelante, Sofía.
Go ahead, Sofia. Thank
Muchas
you,
gracias,
Pamela.
Pamela. Eh,
First of all,
Primero
thank
agradezco
you,
a todos quienes están
those that are
participando de
participating in
este
these
conversatorio.
conversations.
Aprovecho
I want to take this moment
de a quienes
from those that
están
are from
desde
other
otras
regions
regiones
with us,
acompañándonos,
and want to say
reiterar
once
que
again
en el
that
panel
in the
inferior
bottom
pueden
panel,
encontrar
you could find in the
el
button
botón de
for
traducción,
interpretation,
inglés,
English
español, español,
or
inglés,
Spanish.
or in the bottom panel in the screen is the translation English, Spanish, Spanish, English. Thank you. Siguiendo con
Well,
esto,
continuing on, I
quería
wanted to
darles
welcome you
la
all
bienvenida desde
for
UN-GGIM
UN-IGM
América, que nos
Americas,
tiene muy
which has us quite
contentos
happy
poder
to be able to
realizar
do
este
this
tercer
third conversation
conversatorio respecto
about the
del
integrated framework
integrado de información
of geospatial
geoespacial
information
de
from the
Naciones
United
Unidas,
Nations,
UN-GIF.
UN-IGIF.
Hemos
We've
tenido
had
ya
two
dos conversatorios sobre
panels about
gobernanza,
governance
sobre
policies,
política,
and this
y
third
este tercer
conversation is
conversatorio
about
sobre
data.
datos
It's
es muy
quite
importante
important
para cómo
as to
avanzamos
how
en la
we make progress in the
implementación
implementation of this
sistemática
framework
en cada
in
uno de
each of
nuestros
our
países.
countries.
También, como
As
ya
I
les
mentioned,
decía, para nosotros es muy
it's very comforting for us
reconfortante
being able
poder
to
tener
have
también esta
this
colaboración
collaboration
que nos
and that we
acompaña
have support from members of
miembros de
other
otros
regional
comités
committees from
regionales
other
de las
regions,
regiones que
which belong
pertenecen a
to
GIGIM.
GGIM.
Y nada más,
And
solo
I just want
quisiera
to say
agradecer
thanks and the
la participación
participation
de
of
cada uno de
all
los
the panelists
panelistas
from
del día de
today.
hoy, a
John
John
Kedar,
Kedar de parte
who
de Data
is
Alliance,
here and
también eh, eh,
wanted to
saludar y
greet and
agradecer la
thank the
participación
participation
de
of the
la
presentation of
presencia
the
de la
experiences from
delegancia de
countries like
países como
Argentina,
Argentina,
Mexico,
México
and
y
Barbados.
Barbados. Y también
As
agradecer
well, I want to thank
la organización
the
de este
organization for
conversatorio,
this
a nuestra secretaria ejecutiva,
webinar,
que es esta Pamela
our
acá,
executive
y a quienes
secretariat, Pamela,
coordinan
which
este
is the one
grupo de
who coordinates
trabajo,
this working group,
y sí,
and
principalmente para
mainly for
este
this
conversatorio,
conversation
quien ha sido
or panel
representante de
that's
la
been
organización
important
desde
from
Panamá.
Panama.
Así
So
que
without
sin
further
más,
ado,
los dejo
I
con
leave you with Pamela, who
nuestra
will
presentadora.
introduce the participants. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you
Muchas
very much,
gracias
Sofia,
por
for
sus
your
palabras. A
words.
continuación, invito a
John
John
Kedar,
Kedar, asesor del
the floor is
proyecto
yours
SDG Data
from Data
Alliance,
Alliance,
quien nos
which
ofrecerá una
will give
explicación
up
sobre la Vía
introduction about
Estratégica
the
número
fourth
4
strategic
sobre datos.
pathway, the
Adelante,
use of
John,
data.
bienvenido.
Go
Muchas
ahead, John.
gracias.
Right, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes, fantastic. All right, so I'm just trying to get my slides to function. Let's see if we've got them right. So there we are, we're up and running. Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you. And I've been involved in the journey of the UN-IGIF now for how many years? 7 years since its inception. And to see the Americas region using it, to see it having discussions about it is a real pleasure. The UN-IGIF is a framework. It's a framework for nations in particular to strengthen their integrated geospatial information management. And the word integrated is deliberate because ultimately geospatial information is strongest when it's integrated with other data to make decisions. There are actually three parts to the IGF. Part one, which is a high-level guide. Part two is a set of chapters focused on implementing, deciding what to implement. And part three is the country level action to develop its own action plan or strategy. And the UN-IGIF is unique in that it is very broad in its considerations. You've seen this diagram many times, 9 strategic pathways that cover governance, technology, and people aspects. It's far wider than discussions around NSDIs have been in the past, and that is deliberate. But at the center of everything we do is data, because without data, we can't achieve the benefits. And that, of course, is today's discussion. And here's the same thing in Spanish. But the one thing that we often forget in our discussions is this is about users, and it's about users gaining benefit. We often focus on the data or the governance or the finance or the capacity in education, but ultimately the value comes from users using our data and services to deliver benefits for their organizations, for the nation, for their communities. Now, strategic pathway 4, the data, is really about establishing a geospatial data framework and the custodial guidelines for the collection of management of integrated geospatial information. And the pathway considers the best practices. It considers examples about how to do different functions across the data environment. And it's all around trying to help nations develop and deliver accessible geospatial data that is right for the problems that the country faces. And you can see the 4 areas it focuses on: the data themes, custodianship, acquisition and management, data curation and delivery, and data supply chains. And it gives comprehensive, the IGIF gives comprehensive guidance on the best ways, if you like, to consider these different elements. There are also in the United Nations documentation a set of documents or a set of fundamental geospatial data themes that are laid out in documents. And the global fundamental geospatial data themes cover 14 different geospatial data themes considered fundamental to strengthening a country's geospatial information infrastructure. So as we consider data, we're considering data, fundamental data or foundation data, some call it, across all of these different areas. And we've got to remember that Earth observation is considered a geospatial data theme. It comes under ortho imagery here. Earth observation is important, and the maritime environment is equally important. Water, maritime depth, as we move into areas of marine resources, whether it's fisheries, whether it's environmental protection, or whether it's seabed mineral mining, the maritime environment is critically important too. all of this data is about outcomes. These are the SDG goals, the 17 goals. It's about outcomes. If our data is not helping deliver these, or actually national priorities, then our data has no value. And that will come back to time and time again, I'm sure, today. The IGIF covers a whole range of considerations for nations in establishing the best ways to manage its integrated geospatial information. And as you read the IGIF, you will find chapter 4 of part 2, you'll find that there is information about all of these different considerations here. And I'm not going to list them. We don't have time. I just want to close by saying there are two main approaches to using the IGIF to develop a national strategy or a country level action plan. The United Nations has an approach which I'm working with 4 nations in the Americas to help them deliver. That is the countries doing everything themselves. And the World Bank has an approach which it tends to be consultant led in order to develop action plans. They're pretty similar. But I just wanted to note these are different to the IGIF itself. These are processes to help countries implement the IGIF. And with that, I will close. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this session.
Muchas gracias, John.
Thank you, John, for your valuable presentation and introduction to the strategic pathway for about data. I see that a lot of people have joined to this conversation. Welcome. We have interpretation in English and Spanish. To continue, we will begin the round of presentation in charge of our colleagues from Mexico, Barbados, and Argentina, who will share their experiences in the implementation of the strategic pathway of data, focusing on different cycles of information. We ask that you please be brief. I leave José Luis Mondragón, Director of Geomagic Direction from Geography and Environment from INEGI, who will share his experience in the production of data. Welcome, José Luis, and thank you. Thank you, Pamela, and good morning or afternoon to all, depending on where you are at. Allow me to share my presentation. I will ask specifically about the cycle of production, the production of information. In the Mexican case, giving a global framework and an example which is quite specific. We will talk about Mexico. Well, here we have a concept which is the natural information for natural interest, which leads the efforts of all institutions of the country to produce information. We will specifically talk about the topographic information case, which quite recently we did a methodological change. That's quite interesting. I will talk about that change and what's happening now. Tools for production, which are quite important. And finally, the repository of geographic and environmental information, where we integrate all this information so that afterwards we get widespread it and leverage it. First, what's information of national interest in Mexico? In Mexico, we have something called the System of Geographic and Statistical National Information. This other law is information which is official and mandatory. Its use is mandatory for the federation, for federal or state institutions and municipalities of the countries. This information of natural interest reaches this category when it complies with 4 criteria. One, that it must deal with one of the following topics. Let's remember that the natural system encapsulates the statistic and geographical information. This is why the topics or data groups need to be socio-demographic, economical, geographic, and environmental, or governmental information. That's important to consider it as an international, as national interest information. And for that to be featured like that, it's necessary to support the design and evaluation of public policies at a national scope. Another feature that it must have, the information of national interest, it should be generated regularly and periodically, and as well, it should be prepared or produced under a methodology which is scientifically sustained. In the particular case of geography environmental datasets, the law states that the following datasets should be produced. It has to do with the atmosphere, biodiversity, water, soil, flora, fauna, shores, border, municipal, federal limits, reports, topographical information, climate data, geographical names, hazardous waste and solid waste, geodetic reference frame, continental, insular, and depth or underwater elevation data sets. These are compatible with the UN-IGIF. I'll talk about the specific case of the production of information, topographic information production, which has history in the country from the 70s. There are topographic graphs are shown. You all know topographic information shows infrastructure, orography, hydrography, localities or cities of the country, and its relations with others have information about elevation, hydrographic features, vegetation, agriculture, etc. This information is produced back from the 60s in a very similar format to which we're seeing on screen right now. But we did a methodological change, which traditionally this information has been always produced or generated based on the divisions of the country. We're talking about scale 1 to 50,000, and a big change is that in 2023, it was official, and starting from that, in one hand, vectorial updates is now carried out in a national continuum. Before, it was updated in a cartographic format by format. Now it's updated in a continuum. And the term in periods of update and publications now in 1 year, when before to update all cartographic format, they were cycles of 6 years. And so it's an important change in the sense of to how we update information, and that the information is available for the public much faster. This has brought a lot of benefits. The issue that we had by updating set by set is that the elements that were in the divisions, close to the divisions of the cartographic format, we never had them complete. Here we have an example of a body of water where it is divided. And so we really had, in this case, 8 polygons, each of them with a different identifier. And so we had that issue. If somebody wanted to do an integration at some region in Mexico, they would always take this into account, that the information of the borders were divided. Under the new methodology, we have a national continuum where, in this example, this body of water is just one polygon that has one identifier. This other case of a body of water, this is the biggest lake of Mexico, Chapala, close to Jalisco, Guadalajara. In order to cover the whole lake, we needed 6 cartographic maps, each of them with different update dates, and so a cycle within the cycle of 6 years. With the new methodological shift, we have one body of water, one polygon with one identifier. And when it's updated, it's globally updated. And it doesn't matter what map or chart it belongs to. This is the scheme of the production process. We will not go into details because of time of the topographic information, but we update the space objects at the same cycle. They do runoffs of fields when it's necessary. There are validations made with tools that we have up until when we do a final verification and the vectorial product is made available. In the map, we end up making maps to have the full vectorial set. To do this, tools for production are quite important. Some important points is that production of topographic information is totally based in a geographic centralized database where you access from the national offices in Mexico. We developed vector editing tools, which are advanced to change the topographical features. Validation is made in the same production line, topological and attribute validation. And we developed a satellite image web service for use throughout the country. We have a tool, the main tool that we use for updates and extraction and generalization of the information, of the topographic information. It is a tool with a web interface where all editors from the institutional internet, log in to update the national continuum of the map. We have an example of the advanced editing tools that they have. For example, complete polygon tool, which uses an auxiliary line which generates a new polygon, which perfectly matches with another polygon that's already in the database. In this way, we ensure topological consistency. I mentioned that we developed a web image services of high resolution, and it's used throughout the countries and the offices of INEGI to update each office, the parts that from Mexico that it belongs to, and this service allows access to the database of high resolution images and the metadata as well. So each image you could obtain the date and the resolution, which is quite important for metadata. of the output information. The results that were obtained, well, the National Topographic Information Continuum contains more than 17 million cartographic instances, while during 2024 updates, thanks to these tools, almost 5 million instances were updated. 151 editors from the regional and state offices of the Institute participated for this update. They all participated in this update. And a national set of vectorial data was extracted from the database and will be published on December. It's important to mention that all information, not only topographical information, but geospatial information that we produce is integrated in our repository of geographic information and environmental information, which we deliver information to all users. There's a repository feeds different outputs of information as a digital library that we have an internet where you could download all topographic information and other geographic information that we have in INEGI. Aside from this repository, we feed the digital map of Mexico. We also have download tools so that users can obtain the national continuum of topographic information or a portion of this continuum. And a tool that, aside from the continuum, creates topographical maps on demand of the zone that's required, and now not binded to the traditional division of the maps. You can get the exact data that you want to create a map from. Users of this information are state units, the academy, private initiatives, and general users. And as we remember, by law, the National System of Statistic Information and Geographic Information, state members are obligated to use this information that produced by INEGI to establish public policies. We'll not dive deep in diffusion, which is interesting, and maybe another case we could talk about it, but in this moment, is centered on the production of data. Final comments, well, with updated, accessible information and accurate information is essential for good decision making from the government. And it's also important that the production processes are under alignment with the objectives of the national system, that they are efficient and effective and are controlled, and that the personnel that participates in the productive process has the adequate tools for work. As we saw the methodological change of the topographical information that we hold, we always must remember that there is space for innovation and production of geographical information. Processes can be improved little by little or in radical leaps. This is when it's convenient and the institutions prepare for that. Well, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully, it was an interesting presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Jose Luis, for your presentation and your availability to participate in this panel. The Mexican experience will be valuable for the participants. Continuing with this panel, we invite Michelle Sinclair from Land and Topography and Housing Ministry from Barbados, who will share her experience on production and management of data quality. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone on the call. I want to thank UN-GGIM Americas and the working group for allowing me to share Barbados's experience. I'm just going to share my screen now. And just confirm for me that you can see it. Okay, great. Great, thank you. It's not allowing me to forward. Let me just double check. And just give me a chance to do that again. Now we're working. So to set the context and to give you some background information, Barbados is one of the Caribbean small island developing states. We are the easternmost state of only 166 square miles or 430 square kilometers. We have invested heavily in terrestrial data about the land, but we are now opening up and expanding to look at marine data, because for us, our exclusive economic zone, our sea space, is almost 400 times our land area. So that is one of the areas we are working towards. And just to give you an overview, we have improved how we use data to support our national priorities, how we use data to support innovation. And we're also working on making sure we can reduce that duplication of effort and those silos that existed in Barbados for a long while making sure we have data that is accessible to users. One of the challenges that we have is that we do not have a national geospatial committee or a policy. So the onus has been on the Lands and Surveys Department, my department, which was focused on mapping, on the national mapping, to kind of take charge. And so I just want to give you an overview of where we are in terms of data and in terms of the elements that John mentioned earlier in his presentation. So we've done quite a large amount of work to improve and to have more fundamental data sets. But there is some work to be done in terms of the profiles and the descriptions and making sure that we capture those. We also, unfortunately, do not have established roles in terms of custodianship. As agencies and departments create data, that is usually their data. And of recent times, we are working on how we share between the departments to be able to understand those roles in terms of data owners and in terms of data producers. We have had a much greater focus on data acquisition, and I'll highlight that as we come to the next two slides in terms of the work we've done to acquire data, to capture data, and we've made some strides in terms of how we deliver data through our GeoPortal. There is still a lot of work to be done with respect to data supply chains and the need for a roadmap and data analysis, a data gap analysis, but I will also speak to the opportunities that we've seen in the last year or so in terms of the work that we can do to improve how we implement strategic pathway 4. So with respect to capturing and acquiring data, we've aligned our data sets with the global fundamental data sets we have here. And the ones outlined, highlighted yellow, are the data sets that we do have, we have information for, and we've been working towards the others. In particular, I want to focus on the ortho imagery, our aerial imagery. Barbados has a history of having aerial imagery dating back to as far as like 1950, but I want to focus on the more recent times. So we had, I would say maybe 10, 12 years between capture. But then in 2006, we made an effort. It had been 15 years, and we wanted to be able to update our national data sets. And from that imagery, we were able to acquire and extract our transport network, our buildings, our land use elevation models. And as we started to incorporate those into decision making, we saw the need to make sure that we had more frequent updates. And so here is where, as a small island, we had to get creative. In 2015, there was a coastal zone management project, which is not our department. But when they came to us to ask for help in terms of the geodetic infrastructure, we collaborated to see how could we expand the deliverable. So instead of having a LiDAR survey of just the coastline, have a LiDAR survey of the entire island and be able to extract data from that. So we've had to get creative in how we finance our data acquisition. The other thing we did was to tie it to national projects we were working on as a means of increasing the frequency that we did the data capture. And we did that in 2019 as well. And at that time, we proposed to government, let us formalize in terms of having every 2 years data acquisition of the ortho imagery to help support the fundamental data sets. In 2023, we got creative again. The Caribbean Community Climate Change Center wanted to embark on a region-wide project where they showed the importance of LiDAR surveys. They were focused on the coast, but again, what we said was, let's work together, and we did an island-wide ortho imagery. So we've been more consistently now acquiring data to use for the island. I also want to speak to land parcels. This has been another data set that we've gotten tremendous support for. So the government of Barbados embarked on a public sector modernization program, and the Lands and Surveyors Department got creative on how we could access some of that funding because it was an Inter-American Development Bank sponsored project. So we used that as an opportunity to update our land parcels data set by converting the survey plan information and the land tax parcel information we had into a digital parcel fabric. That work was completed in 2023. And so now we're working on, as we move forward, continuing to capture, acquire that data, and keep that data set up to date. I also want to speak to data integration because we have the fundamental data sets pertaining to addressing and building. And in Barbados, we had the issue of not having a national addressing system. So the department came up with the idea of a building ID to stand in for the addressing system, to be that unique identifier, and to allow for data integration across several departments. So the Barbados Statistical Service, who are responsible for the census, are using it as a means of integrating their data, as well as our electoral and boundaries commission. They're responsible for the voting maps and the administrative areas. So we've been working to integrate data so that more users, particularly focusing within the government agencies, can interact with the data, use the data for their specific purposes. The land parcels are another example where we've used from the Revenue Authority. They have a unique identifier, and we've used that as a means of integrating data, integrating all the data for land-related agencies. So that includes us as the Lands and Surveyors Department, our land registry, which is responsible for ownership, a planning and developing department, and the Revenue Authority, who are responsible for the land or land tax system. So with respect to those fundamental data sets, keeping them current, being able to capture data, it has been important for us to maintain our geodetic infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure in terms of the traverse stations, which you're seeing as those red triangles. You can see those are focused mainly on our western and southern coast. That's where our population is mainly in those areas. And our trig stations or primary trig stations, but we made an effort to work on transformation parameters to allow persons capturing data in WGS84 format to transform to our Barbados national grid, which is the coordinate system that we've used for our maps in Barbados from the 1980s forward. So we've been working on maintaining those, and as well, due to our participation in Caribbean project through UN-GGIM Americas, we were able to have our first core station in 2018, and we've now since expanded that to 3 stations. And so we are working on making it easier for persons producing data to be able to have accurate positioning. And just with respect to data delivery, we have made an effort to make our data available or at least discoverable. Some of it is behind permissions, but we've created the Geoportal as a means, as a means of allowing persons to browse the data that we have or the data that we hold for other departments, for example, statistics, water, and planning. So we're working on making sure that our delivery of the data is there as well. So the opportunity that I spoke on before is recognizing that we had that deficit in terms of data governance. There was a mandate from Cabinet. They wanted a national infrastructure asset repository, which spoke directly to the physical infrastructure data theme. And they said the agencies needed to get together. So we're using that as an opportunity to also not only look at the physical infrastructure, but to say, here are the national systems we need to put in place in terms of data governance framework, in terms of policies, in terms of metadata creation checklists. So we are going to piggyback on a project sent down from Cabinet and say, okay, we also need to look holistically and help us to implement our UN-IGIF. And just in terms of our next steps, we know that we have the data. One of the issues is managing it sustainably. So our next steps are looking towards those plans and those frameworks, as I mentioned in the slide before, as well as looking at data for the SDGs and resilience and being able to work those things which are important to government, important to the country as a whole, as a small island developing state, and bring those in to the work what we're doing in terms of strategic pathway 4. So I want to thank you for taking time out to hear Barbados's perspective and look forward to your questions.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you, Michelle.
El agradecimiento
Thank
para
you
ti
for the
por la
time and the
presentación, por la
interesting
interesante
presentation that you've
presentación que has hecho
made
de la experiencia
from the
de Barbados.
Barbados experience. We will
Vamos a
continue
continuar
to
para
wrap
luego
up.
finalizar.
Hopefully we have some
Queda un
minutes
par de
for some
minutos para algunas
questions.
preguntas, para canalizar esas preguntas.
Up
A
next,
continuación,
we
invito
invite
a
Maria
María
Laura
Laura
Santalaria,
Santalaria,
responsible from
responsable del
the
Departamento
Data
de
and
Datos y
Geoservices
Geoservicios
from
de
the
la Secretaría
Executive's
Ejecutiva de IDERA, la Infraestructura de
Secretariat
Datos
from the
Espaciales de
Republic
la
of
República de
Argentina,
Argentina, quien nos compartirá su
Geospatial data. They will
experiencia en la
share the
integración y
experience on the
publicación de
publication of
datos.
data and
Bienvenida, María
integration.
Laura.
Welcome
Bueno,
and thank
muchísimas
you.
gracias. Buenas
Good
tardes
evening,
a
everyone.
todos y a
And
todas.
thank
Muchas gracias
you
por la
for the chance
posibilidad
to
de
participate
participar
in
en el
this
conversatorio
panel
y la
and being
posibilidad
able
de
to
compartir con
share
ustedes
the
la experiencia
Argentinian
argentina en la
experience and the
implementación
implementation
de la
of the
vía
strategic pathway
path
4 from
del IGIF. Voy a
UN-IGIF. I
compartir
will share
pantalla
screen.
para compartir mi presentación. No sé si estás viendo. ¿Se
Sí,
ve?
se ve.
Bueno, bárbaro. Bueno, y
Before
antes que
anything,
nada,
I want to say
decirles
that
que la
implementation
implementación
of the
del
integrated framework
integrado
of
de
geospatial
información
information
espacial
in
en la
the
República
Republic of
se
Argentina
realiza,
is
se lleva
done
a cabo a
through
través de
IDERA.
IDERA, que es la IDE de la
What is
República
IDERA?
Argentina, de la cual el
The
titular de la
Natural
Nacional es la
Geographic
Secretaría Ejecutiva.
Institution.
IDERA es
It's
una
a
comunidad de
community of
información
geospatial
espacial que tiene
information
por
which has
objetivo
a
propiciar el
goal
acceso a los
to
datos, a los
foster
productos y a los
data
servicios
for geospatial services on their standards, ensuring interoperability, use, and reuse. Through its representation, IDERA seeks to maintain national and federal character. The goal of the implementation of the integrated framework is strengthening IDERA and strengthening all the nodes of IDERA, which are parts of IDERA. Currently, an important information we must not leave aside is that we as IDERA, we don't produce geospace data. What we do is we integrate and publish data produced by the nodes attached to IDERA. Currently, there's more than 452 members in different jurisdictions, national, provincial jurisdictions, local governments, universities, and there's federal councils, companies, and NGOs. But how is this implementation done? To implement the integrated geospatial information framework, what we do is we enrich it through the framework, our strategic plan. From the implementation and the decision to implement UN-IGIF in our working plan, what we did was adapting the working plan in accordance to the 9 paths, and we take elements of these paths and we display them in our working plan to then afterwards from goals and concrete actions we can progress in those elements. It's not that we take and follow the 16 implementation paths. IGIF is the document of reference, a guideline which establishes those elements that we're working on currently and those that we haven't started to work in, and we have them as a path to follow. Within each of the paths, we have, as I said, goals that are specific and actions that are specific. Within Path 4, one of the actions, one of the goals, the specific goals that we have is inclusion of the 14 fundamental topics in our catalog of geographic objects. As a working line to follow, we have a catalog of geographic objects that has 276 objects with different classes, attributes, domains of value, and the idea is so that we can complete our catalog based on the implementation of the fundamental topics in which we still have no data on. And as well, from this catalog of geographic data, we have a subset of those objects which compose a catalog of basic and fundamental objects. And, well, in order to do all of this within IDERA, there are recommendations that are followed through for the catalog and other topics. There are recommendations that are derived from regulation. We in Argentina, we use the regulation 19.110 for cataloging, 19.115 and 19.139 for metadata, and the implementation of web services 19.128 and the OGC ISO standards, which the ones that complete this information, the ones that work in the definition of the elements of the catalog or the metadata profiles. These are specific from IDERA. And the ones that are involved are the group of geospatial information, the group of metadata, the group technology of development, and the Academy of Sciences, and one which is quite recent, which is our science group of data. And even though having these regulations, these standards, even though driving from IDERA, the compliance of these norms and these standards, it happens that to many bodies, it's hard to obtain the information and publish information in a standardized manner. So we have different working axes. On one hand, one of the working axes is doing follow-ups in the bodies, in the national bodies, which deliver the information at a national scale. And what we do in regards to these agencies, we analyze the published information, we analyze the objects that are being published, if they're basic and fundamental data, if those data are cataloged, if they have a portal where they show this information, any display, how accessible is this display? Because it happens that agencies have a display where they show the data, where they publish it, but access to that display is not an easy access. So that's another topic that we assess. Geoservices that are made available, metadata, if they have metadata, if they have a data management tool, if they follow or comply with the profile of IDERA metadata, and all this in order to strengthen the quality of information and ensuring interoperability of geospace data. Why? So that this data are robust and allow being a efficient consumable when we elaborate public policy and so on. The better the data, best decisions will be made based on them. Another the axis in which we are working in, it's in projects of integration, geospatial information integration, the Fundamental Data Committee. It's a committee which was composed starting from the assembly that we had this year in IDERA, where representatives of all jurisdictions participate. The goal of this commission is to develop action lines to continue in fundamental data and binding and articulation actions, because in many cases it's necessary to integrate the information produced by different jurisdictions. It's a project of open participation for either members and is composed by different agencies adhered, has multi-jurisdictional collaboration. There's also working a national hydrographic map project. The idea is to create a geospatial layer that reflects the distribution of surface water resources in the national territory. This is a project where the Geographic Institute has integrators, but we're working with national agencies and provincial agencies through the IDE, the provincial IDE, and the agencies that are working in these topics. And we're working in a provincial road administration project for road information and the producers of this information. This project is a project that is being led by the group, a technical working group from provinces, and has multi-jurisdictional articulation. In regards to the integration of statistic and geospatial data, from an assistance that CEPAL gives in this aspect, there was a workshop held to where we gathered the National Geographic Institutes and Census and Statistics Institute to work with this in the Republic of Argentina. After this workshop, there was an itinerary developed, and currently we're working in the implementation of this itinerary, specifically in the adaptation of common geometries that has to do to revise the human settlement layer and being able to define matching in regards to locations of the human settlements. Also, there's work done in agreement in the procedure for updating the common territory units in geometry, departments, local governments, and also work being done in the inconsistency analysis. There's also work in ensuring the interoperability of the statistical and geospatial agencies information with these regulations and recommendations promoted from IDERA, and integrating the geospatial and statistic information at a national scale and at a provincial scale. Now,
Con respecto a la
regarding
publicación
publication of the
de la
geospatial
información
information
geospatial,
from
la
IDERA,
IDERA se pone a
we made
disposición,
available
o
from
bueno,
the
la IDERA se
website
pone a disposición
different
diferentes
tools.
herramientas. Por un
We
lado,
have
con un
a
visualizador
display in which we publish all
todos los
basic
datos
and fundamental
básicos
data,
fundamentales,
and
y
we
también
also
tenemos una
have
solapa en la
a
cual
place where
podemos
we can view
visualizar los
data
datos de
of
cada
each
uno
of
de
the
los
nodes
nodos
from
del GGIM,
IDERA
a través de sus servicios
through
WMS.
WMS services. In
También
IDERA
de
website
alguna
as
manera
well,
consignamos toda
we
la información
consider
que tiene que ver con los
with
servicios
the
o los
nodes all the
nodos
information that are
que
composed
comprende
by
IDERA,
IDERA,
ya sea
WMS,
WMS,
WFS,
WFS,
coverage
servicios de
services,
cobertura. Y
and
también
we have a
tenemos un
catalog of
banco de
metadata
metadatos en
in the
GeoNetwork, en el
Geo
cual
network
nosotros
where
vamos
we
cosechando
harvest all
todos los
metadata
metadatos que
produced
producen
by
los
the agencies.
servicios. Bueno, y
And as
también
well, we
tenemos
have
información
information on
de portales
geoportals
y
and display,
visualizadores de otras IDE.
and what
¿Y qué
challenges
desafíos y
and
próximos pasos
next
tenemos
steps.
por delante? Bueno, tenemos
We
muchos,
have a lot, but amongst them,
entre
we
ellos,
have, and regarding
desarrollar la
to
P4,
path
mejorar la
4,
calidad y la
improving quality
interoperabilidad
and
de la
interoperability
información
of
de todos los
geospatial
nodos de
information of
IDEA,
all IDERA nodes,
fortalecer la
strengthening the
integración
integration
entre
of
información
geospatial
geoespacial,
information
sobre todo
provided at an
para fines jurisdiccional,
interjurisdictional scale in order to
optimizar
optimize
recursos, evitar
resources and
duplicación,
avoid
porque
duplicates,
sabemos que
because
muchas
we know
veces
many times
los datos
data
se
are
producen en
produced
diferentes jurisdicciones,
in
en
different
diferentes
scales.
escalas, entonces hay una duplicación de esfuerzos. Promover el
Promoting the
uso
use
de
of
datos
geospatial
geoespaciales
data as
como
a key
herramienta
element for
clave para
decision
tomar
making and
decisiones y
establishing public
lanzamiento de
policies
políticas
based on
públicas
evidence
basadas en evidencia,
and to
trabajando en la
continue working the
integración de
integration
información
of
geográfica e información
geospatial
geoespacial,
and statistic
también
information,
impulsando el desarrollo
continuing
de los 14 catálogos
advancement in the
mundiales
14 global fundamental
geoespaciales,
geospatial data to
principalmente el
strengthen our
catálogo
geographic object
concreto
catalog,
geográfico, y
and
también seguir avanzando en
progressing
el
in the
desarrollo de
development
otras
of
herramientas
tools
especialmente que
proposed in
propone
strategic
la
pathway
guía
4.
4 del UN-IGIF. Bueno,
Well, thank
muchas
you very much.
gracias.
I'm going
Dejo de
to stop
compartir.
sharing. Thank you
Muchas
very much, Maria
gracias, María
Laura, for
Laura,
the
por la
presentation and
presentación
the
y la
experience
experiencia
that
que
we have
trajo IDERA.
in IDERA.
Me
Sadly, we
temo
will
que no
not
vamos a
have
tener
enough time. We're
tiempo, estamos ya
almost
a un minuto de
close to
cerrar el
wrapping up.
seminario, de poder hacer
I
preguntas.
have
He
left
dejado en el chat mi correo
an email
electrónico
chat
para
in order,
finalizar.
my email if
¿Alguna
you have any
pregunta? O
questions or
eventualmente si
comments,
alguien de los
or if one of the
participantes
participants
quiere
wants to
tomar el
take any
contacto en
contact, in
particular con alguno
particular
de los
regarding any of
exponentes.
the
Le
presentation. Thank
agradezco
you sincerely
sinceramente
to
a John, a Isis, por supuesto
John,
también,
EC,
a
Jose
José Luis,
Luis,
a María
Maria
Laura
Laura, and
y a
Michelle for the
Jim por las
presentations
presentaciones
that
que
you've
han
held
realizado.
in
Esta
this conversation. It's
cerrado
recorded and will be
y
made
también
available in
el
the
anuncio
website
de
of
UN-GGIM
UN-GGIM
Américas.
Americas.
Gracias
Thank you
por
for being with us,
acompañarnos,
for
por su
showing
interés
interest in
en
this
este
type of
tipo de
activity,
actividades
which I think
son
are important to know
importantes
because
porque
they
siempre nos
allow us
permiten
to
tener
have tangible
experiencias tangibles.
experiences
Si no
as
hubiera
to
algún
how to
comentario de
develop
alguna de estas
each of these
actividades
strategic
estratégias, los
pathways.
invitamos a estar atentos porque ya el próximo
Next year, we
módulo
will
vamos a seguir
continue
continuando en el
in
marco
the
del
working
grupo de
framework of
trabajo
IGIF
de las
from
Américas
Americas
con
with conversations
conversatorios
about the
sobre las
following strategic
actividades
pathways.
estratégicas.
I don't know if
No
we
sé si
have
nos da
time
tiempo quizás
for
para
maybe
una
a picture.
fotografía de
Maybe
una de
you could turn
nuestras
on your
expositoras.
cameras.
¿Sí? Bueno,
We
vamos
will
a
take
tomar un
a
registro.
picture.
Bueno,
Well, I
creo
think that
que
would
eso
be
es todo. Que
it.
tengan
Great.
una buena
Have a good
tarde, una buena
afternoon,
mañana,
depending
dependiendo
on
del
where
horario que
you're
estén.
at.
Y los
And see you
veo pronto en
soon in
otra conversación. Muchas
another
gracias
panel.
por
Thank you
su
for your
participación.
participation.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias.